All media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Bryan, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.
Well, hello there, and welcome to Nowhere to Hide. It's June 24th, 2022. You might want to circle that date on the calendar. Pretty historic day for a lot of people and for a lot of reasons. And I'm going to just put it this way. This was the day that the Supreme Court affirmed federalism. Now, maybe you were expecting another way to approach that, but all I know is I have not seen the political left this worked up since yesterday when they affirmed Second Amendment rights. Nonetheless, here we are, and yeah, the Supreme Court today overturned Roe v. Wade, leaving the issue up to the states. Now, this has caused a lot of discussion, a lot of consternation. In fact, it's caused not a small amount of reaction on the part of the political left, to where there's great concern about what is this going to mean. Does this mean suddenly we're reduced to having women line up to get fitted for their handmade outfits and, basically be turned into baby factories or something like that? I guess it depends on who you ask. But let's turn to the New York Post to get a mostly objective take on what happened here. The New York Post reports the Supreme Court has overturned its 49-year-old landmark Roe v. Wade decision that legalized abortion throughout the U.S., upholding a Mississippi law banning the procedure after 15 weeks of pregnancy and leaving the issue up to each of the 50 states. The opinion by Justice Samuel Alito also overturned a 1992 case, Planned Parenthood versus Casey, in which the court found that state laws restricting abortion should not impose an undue burden on women seeking the procedure. Now, again, I'm hearing a lot of talk about how, well, this is such a horrible thing because it has imposed, this strict reduction on options for a woman who finds herself, pregnant with an unwanted pregnancy. And in reality, it does nothing of the kind. All it has done is it's taken a one-size-fits-all federal approach, which was hammered down on the heads of the American public back in 1973 in the Roe v. Wade decision, and returned that decision-making power to the states and the people who live within those states and those who they elect to govern them. Now, if you can explain to me why having more choice in the matter, in other words, letting the states decide that for themselves is somehow a bad thing, seeing that there are states that will absolutely, positively affirm a woman's right to have an abortion, in the case of Virginia, right up until the moment of birth. But for some reason, we're supposed to believe that, oh no, this is an attack on womanhood. And by the way, congratulations, everybody who just suddenly figured out what a woman is. Again, I know that we went through a period of confusion there for a while where nobody was certain, at least anybody who wasn't a biologist. But now it seems like we're pretty certain that we know what women are. And at least we have some clarity there. Back to the New York Post. Abortion presents a profound moral question. Justice Alito wrote, "The Constitution does not prohibit the citizens of each state from regulating or prohibiting abortion. Roe and Casey arrogated that authority. We now overrule those decisions and return that authority to the people and their elected representatives." Now, I know that this is a concept that a lot of people are not going to be clear on, because federalism is something that has been largely lost on the public, since about the end of the Civil War. But the idea behind federalism is that the states created the Constitution. Let me put it another way. If there was a political power flow chart, it would start with the people, who in turn delegate some power to their representatives at the state level. And then in the case of the Constitution, the states came together and they created what's known as a compact. That's a multi-party contract between the states, which in turn called the federal government into existence via the Constitution. Now, the Constitution called that government into existence, very explicitly enumerated, meaning it named each and every power and the upper limits of the power that the federal government was supposed to exercise. And it wisely limited it only to a very narrow circle of things in which the states had overlapping interest. Things like interstate commerce, things like defense of their national borders, things like creating post offices and roads and so forth, and foreign policy. Right? So amongst ourselves, we were many little republics. That would be the individual states. But to other nations, we would present ourselves as one. I think it was Thomas Jefferson who put it that way. So All we've done is see a return to the balance of power is more in the hands of the states. And for some reason, for the federal supremacists among us, this is extremely distressing information because they really want that one-size-fits-all approach. They want that top-down, national government says it, so everybody has to do it approach, which unfortunately, when you get that kind of centralized power, it's ripe for tyranny. So any thoughts that, well, 49 years ago when Roe v. Wade was decided, that settled the abortion debate once and for all? No, it didn't. No. In fact, if anything, it just exacerbated the situation and made it that much worse because the states, were still struggling to deal with this one-size-fits-all approach. And clearly, there were some states that were okay with abortion on demand, other states that weren't. And it's been a very bloody, ugly battle, an ideological battle that has waged ever since then. This takes some of the fight out of that battle by returning it to the states where people actually have a choice. And believe it or not, where people actually have a little more influence than they would have at the federal level. Well, let's see what we have from some of the reactions. Oh, look at this. The editors of the New England Journal of Medicine strongly condemn the U.S. Supreme Court's decision. The just announced U.S. Supreme Court decision in Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization represents a stunning reversal of precedent that inserts government into the the personal lives and health care of Americans. Oh my word. I mean, that's look, they're totally entitled to their right to dissent, but is this not the same organization that was all for forcing vaccines on people? Allowing government to insert itself into people's personal health decisions? I'm just curious because there seems to be a really interesting double standard here for my body, my choice. And people who are totally content with punishing or ruining the lives of those who refuse the vaccine, suddenly they've discovered there's a sanctity here that we should not allow the state to cross. Okay, where were you guys over the last couple of years? Just asking. But nonetheless, that's a pretty reasonable response. Let's take a look at some of the other responses. The court's action has eliminated safe access to abortions using proper medical procedures. This is Gainesville, Florida Mayor Lauren Poe. This is a devastating ruling for all women. Okay, safe access to abortions using proper medical procedures. Is that really true? Because abortion is still very much legal, on demand, using the same medical procedures that were available before. But there are certain states that have said, but we're not going to go that route. So the states that do still have that, it's still available. And just like people will travel to avail themselves of medical or even recreational marijuana, likewise, people have that option if they want to, have a medical abortion. But the choice is theirs. And for those who really just can't stand the idea of living in a state that doesn't allow, what they want, that's the beauty of a republic, is you have the option of voting with your feet, taking your tax dollars and taking your influence somewhere where you can be appreciated. See, it's good to have choices. And it's so interesting to me that the pro-choice crowd really doesn't seem all that fond of choice when push comes to shove. As in, if someone wants to choose differently, well, then, they really don't want people to do that. Well, let's take a look at a couple of different reactions from people around the country as to just what this means, because this has been a very hard day for the political left. Let's have a look at what some of the reactions were to Roe v. Wade being overturned.
All the human rights are going to start falling down. All right, LGBTQ plus community, we're next on the chopping block. And birth control. And possibly interracial marriage. So pretty much the only thing that's going to have rights in this country is white men and guns.
Wow. That would be awful. Just white men and guns. And isn't it interesting? There's kind of that domino theory that, if this falls, well, next we're going to see, gay marriage is going to fall. And then probably we'll be, back to, putting black people into slavery. Relax. All this did was it allowed the states and the people of the states to make the decisions that best suit the people within that state through their representative government. And there's still not going to be perfect agreement. But instead of having that one-size-fits-all approach hammered onto us from above, People actually have a choice. But I'd like to get a second opinion. Is it really that bad? Really?
Is about the woman who tried to have a baby so bad and ended up having a miscarriage, who now has to go stand on trial. If we don't stand up now and do something about this, The Handmaid's Tale is going to be more than just a show. And I am sick. How do I look at my daughters and tell them that they're growing up in an amazing place when they're not?
Well, we were an amazing place, when people had the right to abortion on demand. And guess what? They still have that right. But there are also places within this land and within this nation that are now affirming the sanctity of life. And it's understood. Not everybody's going to agree with it. But if a person doesn't agree, they still can avail themselves of the same procedures. They just may have to go somewhere else to do it. I mean, if you want to gamble, good luck. Going to Utah, you're probably not going to get to do that. But if you just go a little bit further to Las Vegas, hey, there's your opportunity. Let's get another opinion. Let's see if anybody else has some thoughts on just how bad this decision must be.
Okay, well, it's going to be a summer of protesting. Again. How are we still living in this? How? How have we not completely dismantled the government? How? Why? Why are we all just sitting here letting this happen?
Completely dismantled the government. I mean, I don't want to be, accusing anybody of anything, but it sounds like something an insurrectionist would say. I'm just saying. But at least she stopped short of actually calling for violence. I hope that everybody will continue to take that approach. Don't you?
I'm just convinced we need to burn it all down. Because at this point, I don't know what else we're supposed to do. I'm advocating for violence. I am advocating for violence because there are people that are doing a really bad job. But the problem with the job is, even though they're doing such a bad job, they do this job until they die. So we're just supposed to sit back and let these people do a really bad job and have really seriously negative consequences on millions of people. And we're supposed to do what? Sit on the sidelines? Light it on fire. We're lighting it on.
Now, again, I have to ask, where was this attitude when, vaccinations were being forced on people and people were being kicked out of their jobs and kicked out of the military because they wouldn't take, the vaccine? I'm sorry, but there's just a lack of consistency. And the idea that, well, burn it all down, burn it down. I don't know why violence seems to be the only answer, but boy, there are some on the left that have definitely taken that approach. Why, look at this. It's a call to action from a group calling itself Jane's Revenge. Hit the streets. You said you'd riot? Well, here's their call for a night of rage, which is supposed to take place tonight. Now, it's sad that they had to settle for the name Night of Rage, but apparently Crystal Knocht was already taken, so they had to go with what they had. But to our oppressors, if abortions aren't safe, you're not safe either. Oh, and just because they didn't want to be left out either, Antifa is going to be a part of the festivities, and they're warning their people, leave your phones at home this weekend. Apparently, they have learned something. Maybe they watched Dinesh D'Souza's movie 2,000 Mules, and they realize, that geo-tracking information on your phone actually could come back to bite you if you're not careful. So, yeah, the bottom line is there are some states that are going to take a very much stronger stance on abortion. In fact, they are going to strictly limit abortion. And while you may strongly disagree with this, it is within the rights of those states and the people who reside in those states to make those kinds of decisions for themselves. Going to the New York Post article, while recent polling has found the majority of Americans wanted Roe v. Wade to be upheld, the decision will allow 22 states to implement total or near total abortion restrictions. Look at the list of the states and tell me if you see any common thread between these states. They include Alabama, Arizona, Arkansas, Georgia, Idaho, Iowa, Kentucky, Louisiana, Michigan, Mississippi, Missouri, North Dakota, Ohio, Oklahoma, South Carolina, South Dakota, Tennessee, Texas, Utah, West Virginia, Wisconsin, and Wyoming. Now, not every one of those states is, a dyed-in-the-wool red state. But it seems to me that there are a lot of these states that are perhaps less urban and maybe, do I dare say, a little more, a little less progressive in their governance. And people still have a grasp on things like religion and morality and a sense of right and wrong. Not so much that they're going around imposing it on everybody, but there are people, you have to understand this, there are people who for the last 4 decades, almost 5 decades, have devoted great amounts of their life and their effort to standing up for innocent life. And I know the spin is, well, but it's taken away women's reproductive rights. And again, I don't agree that I don't think that's the proper framing. And Lord knows, there was a time when the abortion debate, and it's been going on for a long time, prior to 1973 and the Roe v. Wade decision, there was a time when the thing that was at stake was the innocent life, more so than a woman's reproductive rights. So let's take a look at how this is affecting Idaho. And this is going to be of interest because Idaho has actually passed some laws that will have a pretty significant impact because of this decision from the Supreme Court. The overturning of Roe v. Wade by the U.S. Supreme Court triggers a 2020 Idaho law banning all abortions except in cases of reported rape or incest or to protect the mother's life. Now, that law takes effect 30 days after the court's decision, negating the state's current law allowing most abortions up to viability at about 24 weeks. This is from opb.org from today. Now, notice that this is not hard and fast. We're going to hold a gun to every woman's head and force her to have a baby. There are exceptions in cases of reported rape or incest or to protect the mother's life. And I'm grateful that they used the harder standard of the mother's life as opposed to the more malleable concept of, well, it's her mental health. I mean, kind of like when you go to, if you go to a state that has medicinal marijuana, you go to the doctor to get your marijuana card, and the doctor asks, have you ever had anxiety or depression? I mean, it's a pretty low bar. All you have to do is, yes, I've had trouble sleeping once. Oh, well, then you qualify. Here's your card. It's the same kind of approach, a very low bar when you say, well, the mother's health is at stake, because it can be twisted in so many different ways. And this in no way is to minimize those people who find themselves pregnant as a result of rape or incest, or who legitimately face, life-threatening complications from pregnancy. Now, I do have to point out, my wife was a very high-risk pregnancy. Her mother had a hole in her heart. Doctors told her, if you keep this pregnancy, it's going to kill you. And so all of her doctors, and this was prior to Roe v. Wade, her doctors strenuously insisted that she avail herself of a therapeutic abortion, but she didn't. And I will be forever grateful that she made the choice that she did, and she kept my wife, and we're happily married now 32 years later, and it all worked out. Now, not every case is going to be that way, but here's the thing I'm going to ask you to consider. We always hear about cases of rape and incest in the life of the mother. What percentage of the abortions performed over the last 49 years in America, up to the tune of 60 plus million abortions, how many of those really took place because of rape, incest, or the life of the mother being at stake? I'm certain that some of them were, but the vast majority of those abortions were purely a matter of convenience. And I know that there are people that say, well, that's how it ought to be. But look, getting pregnant is not something that just happens when you're just minding your own business and going about life and suddenly, I can't believe it, suddenly I found myself pregnant. A person can choose not to have sex with someone with whom they aren't ready to have a long-term relationship. And more than once, I have heard of, young women who became pregnant and were told by, a loved one or a friend, hey, I know where you can get this thing fixed. And that's what they were alluding to. You can go and have an abortion and get it taken care of. I don't necessarily think that's the right way to do it, but, for some people, that's the only choice. All I'm going to ask you to consider is, let's just say, for example, that a child is conceived through rape. Do we compound one horrific act with another horrific act? Does that really balance the scales of justice? Because I know there are people out there who would gladly welcome that child into their home. How do I know this? Well, because I've worked with a lot of people who have adopted children. I myself was adopted. My sisters were adopted. My wife and I just adopted a boy just a couple of months ago. there is actually a very large contingent of people out there who would love to have that child in their life rather than simply discard it because it's an inconvenient life. And you have to wonder too, when we start trying to decide which lives are convenient and which ones are worth living, that seems to be treading into an area of eugenics that I don't know that we should want to safely go there. Now, David Adler, who's taught constitutional law at Idaho's 3 public universities and had writings quoted by the U.S. Supreme Court, said if the court overturns Roe v. Wade, it would be reversing a landmark precedent and turning control and oversight of women's reproductive health rights over to state governments. A landmark precedent or not, even Ruth Bader Ginsburg said that Roe v. Wade was a terrible decision. It wasn't put together well. The emanations and the penumbras, which supposedly only Supreme Court justices can see, were the reason that decision was made in the first place. That doesn't mean it was the right thing to do. And especially where it forced that one-size-fits-all solution on all the states, it really didn't do anything to settle the abortion issue. Adler said that would essentially eliminate a constitutional right to abortions for women. It eviscerates a woman's reproductive rights and thus turns the control over abortions back to each and every state. We already know how many states have enacted trigger laws that would go into effect, Idaho included. Okay, the finding of the court, the reason Roe v. Wade was overturned was because there is no constitutional right to abortions for women. At least there's nothing that's enumerated in the Constitution. That document pertains to the government. It calls the federal government into existence. It explains the limits, including the upper limits of its power, but it confers no rights on you or me or anybody else. And when we use the term a woman's reproductive rights, again, rights are something that limit government's power over you. So you have natural rights, and I'm not trying to make light of anything here, but I want to point out, as my friend Connor Boyack puts it, actually, I'll share his thought on this. He says, here's a friendly reminder, reproductive rights are not under attack and haven't been jeopardized in any way by today's ruling. Everyone still has the right to reproduce. That's never been in question. The pro-abortion crowd knows this, but they use the term as a propaganda tool. And see, the term reproductive rights, again, this is part of that euphemistic language that we use to distance ourselves from the reality of what takes place in the course of an abortion. I mean, doesn't it sound a whole lot nicer? Instead of saying, yes, we killed the unborn child, we say, we terminated the pregnancy and removed the product of conception. See, one of those is very clinical, very detached. It's hard for a person to really visualize anything other than, well, maybe it really was just a clump of cells or some obligate parasite. And these are actual terms I've heard people use in describing, what exactly that is that's growing within the mother. Why is it that we have to use that euphemistic language to make ourselves feel better about what's happening? Again, if we focus on what's actually taking place, a living organism is being killed. How do we know it's living? Well, because you have to kill it to stop it from growing. And here's a question you may want to ask yourself. Are you still a part of your mother's body? And if not, at what point did you stop being a part of your mother's body? I'm not trying to make anybody feel guilty. I'm just trying to point out there's some real inconsistencies, and that euphemistic language really has the appearance that we're trying to hide from a truth that people would rather not confront. I mean, come on, we don't shy away when we talk about insecticide. Raid kills bugs dead, and we're proud of it. Why don't we talk that proudly about, abortion? If it kills the problem dead, should we own it? Should we, be okay with that? Here's the bottom line. Some states are going to say, yeah, you can have abortion. We'll make the taxpayers pay for it. In fact, there are employers out there who are saying, hey, I'll reimburse you up to $4,000 if you have to travel to get an abortion. So it's not like there's any lack of support for people who want to avail themselves of that avenue. But there are a lot of people, and myself included, who don't like the idea of my money being taken from me to be used to pay for things that I consider to be immoral and wrong. And I think it's wonderful that there are states that will now be able to take a stand and have, the teeth in their policy to say, no, this is not something that we're going to back. I know it's not agreeable to everybody, but here's the beautiful thing. There are plenty of states that will offer you exactly what you're looking for, if that's what you're looking for, and no one is holding you prisoner or forcing you to stay in a place where you don't feel comfortable exercising your reproductive rights. Speaking of paying for things that you really don't want to pay for, I want to shift gears here a little bit. We'll shift away from the abortion issue and talk a little bit about taxes. I understand that the mayor of Boise is a little bit under some scrutiny because the cost of property taxes is going up. And in part, it's because, property values have been skyrocketing, not just in Idaho, but in other states throughout the West. You've seen an incredible amount of appreciation in properties. And I guess one of the points of concern here is that Boise's mayor, McLean, is utilizing some of the increases in funding that she's asking for, the increase in budget, to carry out pet projects having to do with things like, green initiatives and so forth. So this is an article from the Idaho Statesman. Earlier this month, city property owners received their tax assessments, which are up about 30% in Ada County this year. Property values have risen dramatically in recent years as more people move to the Treasure Valley, but increases in value don't necessarily mean increases in tax rates. The assessments come out in late spring, and it's not until after taxing districts set their budgets that an individual's property taxes are determined. Now, in Boise, Mayor McLean is proposing a $306 million budget. That's about $30 million more than last year, according to a summary of the budget. Now, half of that growth would be paid for by federal stimulus money passed under the Biden administration in March of 2021. Included in the federal allocation is $10 million geared toward climate action in an effort to convert city buildings to clean energy, preserve surface water, and fund renewable electricity efforts. As part of the increase, the mayor proposes a property tax increase of 2.45%. Apparently, under Idaho law, taxing districts can raise property taxes up to 3% per year. Now, the city estimates that its hike would amount to a $38 increase for the average priced home, although property owners could see their taxes go up for other reasons as well. More than half of the proposed budget increases would be for personnel expenses, both from hiring new staff as well as increases in wages to police and fire department employees, according to the budget book. The budget book says city costs typically increase each year, mainly for personnel, of which a significant percentage is set by public safety labor contracts. Now, residential property values rising faster in Idaho than commercial property. That means that homeowners pay a higher portion of taxes, about 80% this year in Ada County, according to assessor Robert McQuaid. The state homeowners exemption allows property owners to write off 50%, capped at $125,000 of their home from property taxes each year. And the exemption used to be indexed to property value increases, since rising values make a set dollar amount add up to less in savings each year. But the Republican-dominated legislature got rid of indexing the benefit in 2016 and did not raise the maximum exemption above $100,000 until last year. Now, I understand that the mayor may have the best of intentions with going with, green initiative. And the couple of questions that come to my mind is, first of all, everybody's feeling the effects of inflation. I don't mean to be a downer about this, but if you have money sitting in the bank, it is worth less this month than it was last month. It's worth less this year than it was last year. Why does government how is it able to keep increasing, its needs and its costs, but the rest of us have to tighten our belts? And I know the people within government, well, because you need us and we're providing essential services. And, what would you want to do without all the blessings that the political class is looking to bestow on you? Now, I can't answer that for everybody, but I think at some point the government itself is going to have to tighten its belt. I mean, how much blood are you going to be able to squeeze out of a turnip? And secondly, when I hear people talking about green things, even if there is some federal stimulus money that's coming to be used along with those green initiatives that Boise's mayor wants to implement, the federal money always comes with strings attached. Always. Will that money be around if this is to persist? If this program continues on through the years, how do they pay for it then? Do they have to raise taxes even further now that the stimulus money is gone? Again, you got to think of this in a little bit longer term than just, wow, this is a great idea and let's start it. There's also the idea that green means poor. And anyone who wants to convince you that going green is the way to go is at some level trying to convince you that you're going to be happier with a lower standard of living. Because green is a religion. When you consider that its adherents believe that they're saving the world, they have heretics, that's in the form of, deniers of climate change. They have Satan figures like Donald Trump or anybody who would push for energy independence. They have this dogma of consensus and congregations in the form of various social media groups, and they train children in climate issues as kind of a primary or Sunday school. They have outposts in the form of municipal planning committees and seminaries in the form of city planning and climate science programs. And when their prophets make a prophecy that fails, that's the climate scientists, they're still flatly ignored. So I'm a skeptic when it comes to a lot of these green initiatives, because I really do believe it's more of a religion than not. I just want to leave you with a final thought here. And this is just kind of the all-encompassing thing, as some areas likely are going to see violence tonight directed against churches and other pro-life organizations because of this Supreme Court decision. So much of the turmoil that we're seeing right now, I think, finds its roots in we have deliberately chosen to step away from morality and to distance ourselves from a source of moral authority higher than the government itself. I'm very fond of Alexander Solzhenitsyn, and so I'm going to leave you with a quote from him. It's simply this. He says, "If I were asked today to formulate as concisely as possible what was the main cause of the ruinous revolution that swallowed up some 60 million of our people," speaking of the Russian people, "I could not put it more accurately than to repeat, men had forgotten God. That is why all this has happened." I would submit to you that we are on a similar course in that we have very deliberately distanced ourselves from God. And I know that today, right now, there are a lot of people rejoicing and feeling like in some small way, at least a portion of the population is feeling as though maybe there are some of us who are willing to turn our faces back towards God and away from whatever the other master is that we've been trying to serve all this time. I hope people will make the right choice. I want people to choose for themselves a happier path. And sometimes that means we're going to have to rely on something other than government to make the sea change happen that we need to see happen. I don't think you can pass a law that will make people revere the sanctity of life. So I don't want to see government used as a bludgeon to beat people over the head to make them value life. Likewise, I don't want to see it used as a bludgeon to force people to accept practices that are absolutely abhorrent to people who have a calibrated moral compass. It starts with the individual. So if you want to see change, if you want to see people, change for the better, you got to consider setting the kind of example that will actually pull people after you in your gravitational pull. And all I can say there is don't underestimate the power that you have to influence the people around you for good. But it's going to come from a place of love, and it's going to come from a place of compassion, and not from a place of threatening people with violence or otherwise, trying to beat them up with government. I'm Bryan Hyde, and this is Nowhere to Hide.
Reporters are biased, the Idaho Press Club are biased, all media, newspaper, radio.
To be completely blunt here, Bryan, and there are plans to expand
indoctrination.
That's right.
Well, Idahoans are also concerned.
Horror shot. That line would be moving a little bit farther west.
I'm like crying.
Nobody wants to see
Dark money is influencing policy in our state.
Well, that's not how this works.